stripes, two horizontal stripes, and four red stars running across the center. All sorts of significance for the city and that flag. I'll just give you a few of the basic things. The blue stripes represent various aspects of Chicago's lake, river, and canal system. Secondly, most importantly, I would argue those stars are some of the events in Chicago history that matter. For example, the first stars for the first fort built in this area by the U.S. government. That was about a mile west of here on the river, way back in 1803. Second star, easily the most important thing on the flag, that's for the Great Fire of 1871. We'll certainly hear about that later on the tour. And the other two stars are for two World's Fairs Chicago hosted. If you're not super familiar with World's Fairs, I would not be surprised. They don't really exist anymore. One finicky lady corrected me on that a couple months ago. I was like, I know they're still around. They're not the same. They used to be like the Olympics, but for entertainment. They were massive and amazing. These days, nobody cares about them because you have the internet. But they were huge, amazing events. So now that you've got like a basic overview of the city's history, I also want to tell you one other thing about that flag. You can't tell just by looking at it. It's the story of how the flag design was created, which, by the way, I think is a very beautiful design. More on that in a second. The story kind of tells you how Chicago works. So that flag design I've been talking about is the winning design for the city contest about 100 years ago to come up with a new flag design for the city. For that contest, the city appointed a local artist by the name of Wallace Rice with one job. His job was to create the rules for the contest. That's what he did. Over 1,000 designs were submitted to the contest, and then in true Chicago fashion, the winning design was the one created by Wallace Rice, the guy who made the rules for the contest. Super fair contest. I guess what I'm trying to say is Chicago has had a problem with corruption. Corrupt or not, Wallace Rice made a pretty darn good flag. There are people in the world who love flags. They're called vexillologists. And about 15 years ago, hundreds of them from across the United States were surveyed and asked to rate 150 different city flags from across the United States in terms of their overall design. It was a little surprise to Chicagoans that our flag was rated as the second best designed city flag in the country. If you're curious, the best designed flag was apparently from Washington, D.C. You got some folks from Washington, D.C.? I have a question for you. If you don't know what the Washington, D.C. flag looks like, I'll describe it for you. It's got a white background. It's got two horizontal stripes, and it's got three red stars running across the middle. Basically our flag.
That's what I thought. I was like, what?
So, DC folks, did you know you stole our flag?
Yes.
We did. It's too bad. But anyway, we've got a basic overview of Chicago history. There's more I may try and squeeze in later about our flag, because there's other cool stuff about our flags. But for now, let's get to some architecture. I also want to tell you that during this tour, I'm going to try and point out that the reason why so much cool stuff is here in Chicago today, whether we're talking about stuff you can see or our history, a lot of it traces back to the most important feature in the city, which is this river. This river matters a heck of a lot in Chicago, not just in the past, but still today. So let's look ahead to the left after this bridge. You might see, you probably have been noticing this very tall blue glass skyscraper. It is the new third tallest building in Chicago. It's finished in 2020. The design is quite interesting. A couple things to mention about it. First of all, it kind of looks like it's wavy. What you're actually looking at are stacked boxes. Technically, if you care about this thing, they're called frustos. The glass color changes as the building gets wider and wider. It kind of appears to pulse. And maybe the most amazing feature is actually an accident. As I glimpse up at the building myself, let me see if it's obscured by the clouds. Not yet. Notice that about 10, 15 floors down from the top of the tallest tower, there's a big open space. That was supposed to be home to residences. But about 3 years ago, they put a model of the building through wind tunnel tests. The test revealed something disturbing. The people who would be living on those highest floors up there would be so nauseous from how much the building would sway that they decided they had to modify the building. They got rid of the residences planned for those two big open floors, that's the 83rd and 84th floors, and installed what you see. What you're looking at is called a blow-through, as a guy thought it was called on my tour recently, a blowhole. That is very different. As a blow-through floor will do exactly what it sounds like. It will simply remain an open space to allow the wind to blow through, reduce the sway of the tower. That cost the developers untold millions of dollars in lost residential sales. Also led to a really fun experience for me one day. About 3 years ago, I'll never forget, I was finished giving a tour and a guy walked up to me who'd been on the boat and he said, hey, I work on that building. Do you want to check it out? I thought back to all the advice my parents gave me about strangers, and I said, yeah. Followed this complete stranger to the dark abandoned building. He took me up to the 83rd floor, the blow-through floor. It was amazing. It was terrifying. The only thing preventing me from falling over the edge was a thin plastic mesh fence. It was really cool. Even more amazing were the views I got later from the roof, which, by the way, is the highest you can be on top of any building in Chicago, unless you're on top of the Sears or Willis Tower. It was awesome. We had a great time. We held hands. I'll never forget it. Just a real connection. The only thing I learned from that experience was always trust strangers. Totally worth it. Also want to point out this fountain here on the right. The fountain's obviously not on. It's right next to us right now. The fact that it's not on doesn't really matter. What I want to point out is why Chicago's river is so special. Lots of cities are on rivers. Our river's got a special location. Notice the center of that fountain is a round central section. Then you've got these sets of horizontal lines going left and right from that central section. Chicago's river is only about, from where we are, about 4 miles away from what's called the subcontinental divide. What that means is that when rain falls on this hill, basically a hill, the water goes one of two major directions. If it falls on the east side of the hill, it goes out to the Great Lakes, ultimately to the Atlantic Ocean. If it falls on the west side of the hill, however, it goes south and west to the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. Why does that matter? Back when Chicago was founded in the 1830s, the fastest way to travel anywhere was by boat down a river. There were no steamboats allowing you to go both directions, no railroads either. So you went whatever direction the river flowed. Of course, that was kind of inconvenient. You couldn't go back very easily. So that was true in basically every city in the world except for Chicago. Here, you could go 2 directions. If you just did one thing, cut a canal through this hill, linking the 2 different directions that rivers flowed from Chicago. That's what Chicago did. It was our first major infrastructure project starting in the 1840s and made us the busiest port city in the United States by the 1870s. It led to all sorts of major businesses locating here because the river had made us the center of transportation infrastructure in the U.S. You could go from New York to New Orleans by boat and vice versa once steamboats were invented. And of course, later railroads surpassed boats as the fastest way to travel. And of course, Chicago today is still the railroad capital of the United States. What you saw in that fountain that reflects our location on that subcontinental divide is that round central section is that subcontinental divide, and then the horizontal lines going left and right are the 2 different directions rivers flow from here. Not some obscure geographic fact. It's the reason why Chicago is so awesome. All right, let's look back to another building now. Let's go off to the right. You should see a building here right about now with a yellow-colored onion-shaped dome on top. You see the yellow dome? That used to be a public observation deck when the building was built in 1929. No longer open to the public. More important point is what you see behind that yellow dome. There's something that looks like a chimney. It's not a chimney. That was added to the dome in the mid-1930s when people were more optimistic about the future of Zeppelins. Right around the time they added that to be a dock for blimps and Zeppelins, the Hindenburg infamously blew up. Everyone realized it would be a terrible idea to use it. Building very close to us, basically between us and that yellow top building, you've got this low concrete and green glass building right next to us, practically. This is the University of Chicago's downtown campus, 27 classrooms inside the building. The architect who designed it was criticized for the design because despite the fact there are great views around us and lots of windows, in fact, even on the building, there are 0 windows for any of the classrooms inside the building, not a single one. The architect's response to the criticism was, look, they're classrooms. The students shouldn't be looking out windows anyway. I see some of you nodding. I agree. As a high school teacher, I think all schools should be built to look like prisons to make learning more fun and focused. It's a beautiful school. Straight ahead of us, let's see what we want to talk about. Let's go to the 2 buildings that head to the right just after the bridge. We're talking about the 2 white structures, one is the clock tower. One thing that I'll try and make a point about talking about later if I've got time is the exterior of these buildings. Take a look at the white towers. Take a guess what you think they might be clad in on the exterior. If you were like me, for years I thought incorrectly that was some sort of granite or limestone, maybe some sort of carved stone. That's in fact, as you might be able to tell, thousands and thousands of rectangular, mostly rectangular, glazed clay tiles. That's terracotta. Terracotta I'll talk about in more detail later, but terracotta is basically clay. You can glaze it, bake it, and create gorgeous ornate designs for the exterior buildings. Those 2 buildings that are clad in that white terracotta are 2 of the best loved buildings among Chicagoans. They're called the Wrigley Buildings, built in 1924. Well loved for 2 big reasons. For starters, that terracotta on the outside, always gorgeous day or night. Nighttime, those buildings have always been lit up on the outside by spotlights in the surrounding areas ever since 1924. They're also well loved for the namesake. That's, of course, the Chicago-founded Wrigley Gum Company. Sadly, the buildings are no longer home to Wrigley, though they're still called the Wrigley Buildings. Wrigley left the buildings when they sold them in 2011. Take a guess in your head what you think those 2 buildings would have sold for in 2011. On the one hand, those are 2 well-loved buildings at the start of the Magnificent Mile, some of our highest in shopping. On the other hand, 2011 was 3 years into the Great Recession. I was astounded to read that those 2 buildings sold in 2011 for a total of $33 million. That would not even have bought you a penthouse in the New York City Tower. Regardless, prices have since adjusted. 4 years ago, 2018, they sold again, this time for a more realistic $255 million. That sounds about right. 2 all right, hard to miss it. Second tallest building in Chicago, the Trump International Hotel and Tower, built in 2009. The building was used for the last scenes in the movie The Dark Knight. Probably one of the better known movies taken in the last couple decades. If you saw the movie, I'll point out a couple other spots on the tour if you're interested in Batman facts. Do we want Batman facts on this tour or no? Okay, I'll give you some Batman facts. This was used for the last scenes where the Joker and Batman fought each other in a partially constructed high-rise. It was this building before it was done. One other thing I'll tie into, I'll mention this later on the tour. The building was designed by a very well-known architect, actually the same guy who designed the lead architect on the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. His name is Adrian Smith. He's in Chicago. Next on the right, after this building, you've got a black, boxy structure. It looks very simple to many people. It's actually an architectural masterpiece designed by a world-famous architect named Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, or quite often just Mies for short. This boxy design is quite common. If you've been in cities around the world where you've seen boxy steel and glass buildings, you can probably trace it back to Mies van der Rohe. He was the pioneer of this style called modernism. He was born in Germany, he spent most of his life in Chicago. He even taught architecture in Chicago for a number of decades. So many buildings here are inspired by or designed by Mies van der Rohe. What he did for architecture in the mid-20th century when he made this style called modernism was basically turn architecture upside down. Prior to modernism, buildings were often designed to be really, really attractive, not necessarily really, really functional. He turned it around. These buildings basically have no decoration at all, boxy structures that is. They're practically purely functional. I'll tell you more about the style later, but I should add that Mies van der Rohe had a lot of students here in Chicago. One of them, ironically, possibly not a fan of his teachings. He designed the next two buildings on the right, which are, as you may notice, the exact opposite of what we just saw. These were designed by a Chicago named Bertrand Goldberg. These two concrete round towers are some of the best known buildings among Chicagoans, some of the most recognizable structures in the city. They're called Marina City. You can see why, at least in part. There's a marina at the bottom, but the city part of the name Marina City is way more interesting to explain. Back in the 1960s, when these buildings were built, nobody lived around here for at least a couple of reasons. For one thing, this river had long been nothing but a stinky, nasty open sewer. Secondly, nobody else lived around here either. To your left, for example, is the downtown central business district. To your right, which you would have found, is a lot of office buildings, parking lots, warehouses, train tracks even. So if you chose to live in these two towers in the 60s, you kind of isolated yourself. You were in an area where there were like no amenities in the neighborhood, like a grocery store. So these buildings were jam-packed with amenities. That's why they're called Marina City. They're basically a city within a city. They still have the original marina, 13 floors of parking per building, as you saw, but when the building was originally built, the residents also had access to a bank, a dry cleaners, a grocery store, a movie theater, a bowling alley, a health club, a swimming pool, a cocktail lounge, a drugstore, a barber shop, and on one of the floors they had their own ice skating rink. The ice skating rink, by the way, closed in the 1990s, had to close after somebody tragically skated over the edge of the structure. I'm just kidding. We're all taking this tour very seriously. That's the only time I'm going to lie to you on the tour. I just said that because I want to see if you're paying attention. If you're not, that's fine. It's like the normal they teach in high school. They did have an ice skating rink, that was true. Head to the right after the bridge, we've got the oldest building on the main branch of the river. This reddish-brown brick building is from 1914, known as the Reed Murdoch Center. The building gives you a good idea of what our river's architecture used to look like back when we were a big industrial city. This is one of two of the last remaining old warehouse buildings on the main branch of the river, which we're currently on. This building is no longer home to an actual warehouse. It's now office and retail space, but basically this building is like pretty much every other building that used to be along the river, all brick and right up to the river's edge to easily send and receive goods to and from the rest of the country. Next on the right, I'll try and get a bit farther ahead so those of you hanging under the overhang back there, way back there, can see some of the buildings. Ahead to the right, we've got, after the bridge, a tall, sleek green glass building. This one's from 2009. It's a very modern looking building. It also has a subtle example of what's called contextualism. That's simply when a building is inspired by the surroundings, that is when the design is. The green color in the glass is inspired by this river. By the way, this emerald green color of the river is a normal color. This comes from an algae in the river. As for the building, it's also green in a figurative sense. The building has earned the highest possible designation for environmental friendliness. It's LEED Platinum certified. That means anything to you. LEED stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. The building's environmentally friendly essentially in 2 or 3 big ways. It was built of almost all recycled materials. There's also a rooftop garden, and the building has a system that takes in the water from the Chicago River and uses it to create cool air for the building's air conditioning, which was a very innovative process in 2009. Today that process is illegal. That's true. If you're wondering why, it's because the water comes back into the river hotter than when it went into the building. That interferes with the river's ecosystem. So does the fact that the building system sucks up fish from the river like it's a fish vacuum. Yeah, that's bad. Let's move on. Now above us to the right, hard to miss this hulking structure. This was the largest building in the world when it was built in 1931. It's called the Merchandise Mart, and it's still pretty big. It has 4 million square feet of space. 4 million is hard to wrap your head around. So I'll tell you that our tallest building, the Sears or Willis Tower, has basically the same square footage as this building. So if you took all 110 floors of the Sears Tower, smashed it down and spread them out over 2 entire city blocks, this is what it would look like. The building is so large it had its own zip code up until about 20 years ago, 60654. The building is the other one of the 2 remaining old warehouses on the main branch. Like the previous building we just saw, it's no longer home to an actual warehouse. It's now mostly office space. They'll add that 40% of the building, a huge quantity of it, 40% is showrooms for new fashions and high-end home furnishings. If you are interested in buying a faucet in the building and spending $1,000, you can do that in the building for a single faucet. Or you can buy one from Home Depot for like 50 bucks. But would it be as fashionable? Yes. You can see to our left a very empty boat with 4 people on it for an architecture tour. You can also see a bridge that's raised. One of the few days, actually today is what day is today? The 25th. I believe this is the last day of the summer when our bridges will go up and down. We'll probably also catch it on the way back, which will be cool, depending on the timing. They take a while, but our bridges go up and down on pre-scheduled days, Wednesdays and Saturdays in the spring and the fall, to allow sailboat owners to bring their boats out to the lake for the summer and back in for the winter. I'll tell you much more about our bridges later, but I don't know. I would suggest right now, you might want to turn around. This is a pretty cool view. It'll get better the farther we get from it. Technically, we're not supposed to talk about things that are not any less than a 45-degree angle from where you're sitting. You should turn around and make a different 45-degree angle for yourself. It's just an amazing view. It'll be there for a little while. These bridges will be there for about 5 minutes, but that looks pretty sweet. Chicago's bridges, by the way, are a pretty cool part of the city. We have more moving bridges than any city in the world, except for one, Amsterdam, which is by about double. Got about 50 moving bridges in Chicago, and as you can see, they still work. Just about all of them still go up and down. That's pretty sweet. Yeah, that's going to be a cool view for, I would say, another 10 minutes or so. There's another bridge going up in the next 5 minutes. But we might get to see it out. Pretty neat. That's a cool view. Everyone should just look at that too, right? Stop it. Down heart of the city, where you have a veritable art gallery of world-class architecture in the background.
The boy here already.
And the Franklin Street Bridge is right there. Pretty sweet. Chicago's awesome.
Signala. Taka Oroba da ja do you know.
Who's gonna get crazy? Who's the lucky lady? Congratulations. I've been married for 2 years. It's fun. You have a lot to look forward to. Yeah. All right, let's move on. You only live once. You only live once. We are entering the North Branch here. As we do so, some interesting buildings. We will not be up here in the North Branch for long. We'll be here for about 10 minutes. There's not a ton to see in the North Branch, but I'll try and catch a couple things real quick here. For starters, next building on the left is the oldest building on the tour. I'm talking about the sort of terracotta colored, pinkish brick building. This is from 1898. Used to have no windows, no balconies, all brick, all 4 sides. It was a cold storage warehouse, basically like a big refrigerator. It was made into condos in the 70s, at which point they had to punch out all the windows and balconies and remove the antiquated insulation stuck between the strangest building on the tour. This triangular structure was designed by an architect who loves to sail. His name is Harry Weiss. You can kind of tell the sailing-inspired features of the building are fairly obvious. He has other buildings on the tour that are less obvious, but he does a lot of sailing-inspired buildings around the city. Triangular profile on this building, triangular windows on the roof, round portal windows scattered throughout, even some private docks at the base. Most interesting thing to tell you about these buildings, called the Chicago Red Project, is that they were built in 1988. There's only 4 townhomes, and it's clear that if you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask. I know many of us are kind of hidden towards the back, staying on the green. You can raise your hand and chat. Walk around here just for a minute. I'm going to take a short break. Sometimes long, it's too long, sometimes it's too fast, and walk around, so you can walk around and teach children, creeping ever closer to you. Slowly but surely, it's kind of disturbing, so I want to make sure that they're not moving. So I'm going to walk away from it, and I'll be back here in about 2 minutes. I'll tell you later. Any other questions for now? How's the view back here?
Kita ke dari.
building is kind of neat. It might even look familiar. This curvy concrete building might remind you of Marina City we saw earlier. That was the twin curvy concrete building done by that guy, Bertrand Goldberg. This is River City by the same guy. He even had a similar effect as Marina City when it was built. When Marina City was built in the 60s, you might recall, I mentioned nobody lived along the main branch of the river, and now tons of people live along the main branch and downtown in general. Same is true here. When this was built in the 1980s, nobody lived along the south branch of the river. Now, as I mentioned, with all this construction currently underway and planned, tons of people live along the south branch. But this area had long been an industrial area. The name of the neighborhood to your right still tells you the name of the industry that used to call this area home. The area is still called Printers Row. By the 80s, a lot of the printing companies had shut down in West Chicago, so this area was very depressed economically. And then this was built, changed the character of the area. Now, as of 3 years ago, the last printing company shut down in Printers Row. It's now entirely residential and commercial. So this building kind of is responsible for a major change in this area of the city, but sadly, at least as far as my knowledge goes, it's not too desirable these days for prospective renters for perhaps obvious reasons. For one thing, newer buildings around us being built. We're going to rent in the building. Why not rent somewhere nicer with newer amenities? Maybe it's just my opinion, but when I look at River City, the concrete also looks kind of tired. I'm not sure what can be done about that, but it's not the most appealing building on the outside in some ways. And something you can't tell by looking at the building most days is that the people who live in the building, some of them are kind of rude. I say that because I'll never forget the day I was given here. This is 1,451 feet, whereas the Burj Khalifa is 2,717 feet, almost twice the height. By the way, it's also a gorgeous building. That may just be my opinion, but designed by a firm called Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. I'm sure you've heard of them. Fairly well known. Now, as for the Sears Tower, a couple facts to share with you about it. See how much time we have. Just enough. The building, amazingly, this always blows my mind. The building has almost as many elevators as it has floors. There's 110 floors and 104 elevators. Also, I'll add that the building was designed to sway up to 18 inches from center in any direction at the top. That allows for a total possible sway at one time of 3 feet or 1 meter. My father statue is an iconic Art Deco tower from 1930. The name of the building still tells you the main business it used to be home to. It's called the Chicago Board of Trade. Arguably, Chicago's most important role in the global economy took place in that building and a couple others along the river. We were the home of that building's kind of a relic of what it used to be, but at least now that you know about it, you can appreciate the statue on top. That's the Roman goddess of agriculture, Ceres, up there to honor the building for all labor and trading. And a quick fact, in fact, that building was the headquarters of Wayne Enterprises in the Dark Knight. And I'll add that reason why that business was done here, by the way, of creating the price for goods around the world. We've already kind of heard the answer to it. This river is the center of transportation in the country, so farmers from across the country physically brought their crops to that building to be priced, sold, and distributed to buyers around the country. So Chicago eventually took that role and broadened it for the whole world. So it all started with this river. We got a really cool mural above us to the right. This building was a pretty nondescript structure until about 7 years ago. And this big concrete section you see in the middle was painted with a map. If you want to know where you are on that map, look for the big red brick sticking out the center of the mural. That is this building on that spot in the Chicago River. Hard for you folks in the back to see underneath the line. But we are exactly to the left of that red brick. That's this building on that spot in the Chicago River. So we're going with that big, thick, Y-shaped stripe right now. One other last good view of the Sears Tower above us to the right. If you haven't quite caught it yet, you have to get to enjoy the best views from any bathroom in Chicago there. The women's restrooms for that restaurant have floor-to-ceiling windows that face south toward most of the city. A great place to hang out. If you have time, any time this weekend, even if it's on a rainy day like today, try and find a way to dine, lunch, dinner, somewhere along the river. There's so many good restaurants. It's just a nice way to soak in the city. As we proceed back into this Y-shaped confluence of our river system, I'll try and catch a couple things that are built, hard to catch in the short amount of time we have. To the left, the swirly red sculpture. This was designed by a modern-day Renaissance man named Santiago Calatrava, sculptor, painter, architect, and structural engineer. That's called Constellation. It's the base of a new office building built about 6 years ago called River Point. You also see to our left, we've got three glass buildings, one of them in the middle under construction. This was all that land that these three buildings were on was nothing but a plain concrete outdoor parking lot for decades. With one special feature, it was owned by, and is still owned by, the Kennedy family. They decided to develop that about 7 years ago, so all three buildings that you see were done about 7 years ago, roughly. I'm sorry, the most recent one was only about 2 years ago. That one in the middle is Salesforce Tower, done in 2023. The other two buildings that bookended are residential towers. On the right, building that now doesn't get quite as much attention as it used to. This green glass building on the right long been one of the best loved buildings on the river, at least in my opinion. It's a gorgeous building, simple design. It uses contextualism to the projectors are so precisely calibrated they do not shine into the real of the merchandise, but only onto the stone surface. That's pretty cool. Shows every night, same times every night. Both shows, by the way, the 9 and 9:30 shows have different art. So you can check out both of them. Just a suggestion if you were to dine along the river somewhere, then take a walk along the river walk, catch art on the mark around 9, 9:30. Totally worth it. You got the time. Oh boy, yeah, this looks pretty cool in front of us. No one's going to care about architecture for the next few minutes, so you should just take in this amazing view that comes up, I don't know, once every 100 rides. I'm going to do the same. This never gets old. We'll probably also be honking our loud horn, so brace yourself where you might be anything with it. Chicago's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. It's really cool. While we are heading this direction, I should tell you a bit more about the Riverwalk. We got time. Here we go, Tom. This is all brand new Riverwalk right there, basically. Some of you, I'm sure, are probably new to the city, never seen a bridge broken down, never saw an old Riverwalk. Our old Riverwalk totally different than this Riverwalk. Nobody used it. I'm not even exaggerating. 0 people used the Riverwalk when I did the visit. Over our heads. Let me tell you how our bridges work. Maybe you're wondering that. Underneath each bridge house, there's a giant concrete block. Remember the bridge we saw earlier that was permanently raised? You might have seen a giant concrete block on the other side of it. That's like the other person on the seesaw. So if you want to raise these bridges, amazingly, of course, there's several thousand tons of concrete and steel. All you have to do, basically, like a seesaw, is kick it. They're that precisely counterbalanced. To be more precise, it only requires a kickstart from an engine that's 100 horsepower. That's it. 100 horsepower is enough to make my car go 0 to 60 in about 30 seconds, or use these entire bridges in about 30 seconds. It's pretty amazing. So it's pretty cool. The bridge blocks, concrete blocks are pretty much the bridge houses. The Tribune built that building in 1925. They sold the building in 3 spots around it in 2018 for $240 million. Since then, that tower has been completely gutted. It's now being converted into condominiums. They're basically done this year. If you're interested, the top floor has 2 penthouses listed for $7.2 million each. For that price, you get 4 bedrooms. That's it, 4 bedrooms. The coolest thing you get, in my opinion, you get access to the walkway that exists underneath those flying buttress arms in the exterior of the building. It's pretty cool. Sad to see the Tribune leave that building up. Head to the right, we have a couple of brown brick buildings that are the largest hotel in Chicago, and they have a convention space that for about 3 decades was home to what was called the International Mr. Leather Competition. If you're interested, that's a competition that still goes on in Chicago, just in a different place where a bunch of men get together, dress up as leather, and we have children on let's consider they play cards, have a good, clean, fun time. After them, you can see that there's a building with curvy white balconies. It's hard to get a good close of it because it's off the river, but the building with the curvy white balconies is a gorgeous structure from 2009 that put a Chicago architect on the map. Her name is Jeannie Gang. Should have mentioned her name earlier. First building on the tour, that tall blue glass building designed by Jeannie Gang. Like the building I've just been describing with the white balconies, they both appear wavy. Aqua genuinely is wavy. Each of the city plans he made for cities around the world, Cleveland, London, Brooklyn, Chicago. His plan for Chicago was published in 1909. It was arguably the best plan to follow. That plan was so large and never could benefit. But a lot of Chicago's coolest stuff comes from that plan. For example, you may know Chicago's got a lakefront that's quite extensive. It's about 20 miles, and it's all public land. It runs into changing parks north to south that's almost unbroken for its entire 20-some-mile length. That's thanks to Daniel Brennan's plan. His plan also gave us Michigan Avenue, a beautiful wide boulevard. This plan gave us what's known as the museum campus that's about a mile and a half to our right along the lakefront, where you can find a lot of our best known museums within walking distance of each other. Tourists probably wouldn't care about this, but Chicago drivers certainly do. This roadway to your right called the Wacker Drive, a double. tour. I can tell you that so much that most people do that scene is so awesome in Chicago is because of the river. The river is so influential in the city. You've seen buildings on the tour, for example, like Kirk and Canada with the river. I told you our Chicago flag has blue stripes that are partly to reflect the importance of this river in the city. You've heard about major businesses that are here because of this river. I guess the center of transportation is one of the big industries like the mining industry. This is, I would argue, the most important river that any city is on in the United States. And hopefully it's even inspiring you to check out other parts of the city. If it's a rainy day, I would encourage you to check out so many other neighborhoods of the city. Awesome
ఇది
place.
కాలం
So if you enjoyed the tour, or your tours are local, hope you enjoyed it, learned something. I'll be right up around here if you have any questions or comments, if you have anything else to share. Otherwise, hope you enjoy the rest of your day in Chicago. Thank you so much for a wonderful pleasure.